Hello and welcome back to another episode of the podcast. I'm very excited because I got an email right now, just before starting this, asking me if I want to collaborate with some brands. And I was like, yeah, that's right, I've arrived, bitches. And I deleted the email. It's not that I don't want to endorse brands, because I don't want to seem like that guy who's beyond that. And I'm like, yeah, I can't be tempted and have any kind of person pulling my strings, say, hey. And I think it's good, right? I mean, it's good if you are given the opportunity and the platform is recognized and this podcast is recognized as an avenue. But I feel it's a very fine line, because the moment you cross that, I mean, and I've been offered, I think I was offered a free Logitech mic or a mouse or something grand like that. And they said, oh, if you give this, we give. And I don't know, man, the whole advertising influencer space. I don't know if I'm an influencer, but I'm just very cautious when it comes to taking these emails or these offers seriously, because it just seems like there is a spectrum, right? Like you get the mouse, or you might even get to endorse massive deals. But I did a little stint in advertising, and I don't know if I'm someone, because it's almost like you do it mindlessly sometimes. It's taken like, today it's a Logitech mic, tomorrow it's a car tire, tomorrow it's a mattress. And I've done the ad announcements when I was in radio, and it just feels meaningless because I didn't care. I mean, I was getting a salary, and it was like, oh, whatever, right? It's a part of the job, and hated it. Like, I was doing everything from Healthify Me to Pep's mattresses, and after a point, I'm like, shit, I don't use any of these things, so why the fuck am I talking about it? But then it was like the producer or the program person is like, you have to fucking do it, whether you like it or not. And that's why on this platform, I don't have to do it because someone tells me to do it. And I want to be sensible. If I do take up endorsements, it has to be really good money, because, hey, come on, no one's oblivious to that. And I would love for this platform to have brands that, I use, or something that I like, and that way I can tell you guys, hey, you know what, I like using this. But the thing is that what I like using, I don't want to force down your throats, because you might hate it. You might think, oh, why the fuck is this guy talking about continuous glucose monitors when I don't even care about it, right? But that's the weird part, because just because you like listening to this podcast, or you might stumble upon this podcast, suddenly you hear me going on about greens, or going about super greens, or going about proteins, or going about a certain clothing brand or shoes that I wear. And I find that a little weird. Like, just because you subscribe to this podcast, or certain ideas I talk about, or you might like the conversations or the guests I host, doesn't mean that you have to align with things that I eventually, or might never, the things that I'm selling, because it might just be this. But at the same time, like, when I'm listening to some other podcasts, like, say I was listening to Andrew Huberman the other day, and obviously he's got a lot of endorsement, and he was talking about sunglasses, and I clicked on the sunglass brand that he was talking about, and it was interesting. I didn't buy it, so that I think sometimes makes sense. But for the most part, what I do sometimes is go to the books these guys talk about on the podcast, and that's interesting for me. But just because I'm getting money to sell something to you doesn't mean that you have to like it. So I want to get to that place where if I do it, it's for two reasons. One, as I said, money has to be good. That way I can be like, you know what, I love podcasting and I'm getting paid for it. Fucking brilliant. And second is if the brand is something that is enjoyable, at least enjoyable for me, because that way I don't feel like shit talking about it to you. And if you align with that and you end up liking it, or even going and checking it out and maybe even buying it, then that's a bonus for you, and it's a bonus for the brand. But if I don't get paid for it, and if I don't enjoy talking about it, then there's an absolute no. Because this guy, or this gal who wrote to me, is like, oh, we have big brands like Amazon, and we have all, and I'm like, I do shop on Amazon, and I have no issues with Amazon. We can't be like, oh, they're demons. Maybe there are activists who talk about how Amazon doesn't take care of their employees, and maybe there is a truth to that. I don't know enough, but at the same time, I'm not going to sell you some shitty basics Amazon brand on this podcast, because you know what? We do it in style over here, man. So if I do sell you shirts, guys, it's going to be classy shirts. It's going to be. I'd rather sell my wife's online platform, not myself, my wife. That would be a bit much, and wouldn't get big. Anyway, I'm not going to go down that, because if I go down that path and she hears it, I'm going to get fucked. But I'd rather talk about stuff that I really enjoy using. I really think that it's quality, and it might even make your experience using it better, and you might enjoy it. And if that's the case, then hey, you know what? We're all happy. But just for the sake of money, and it's a really shitty brand, I really hope that I don't cross that line and end up doing it. I've held off so far because the offers have just been fucking flooding my inbox. Because you hear about people putting all sorts of weird ideas into advertising, right? Like putting it on this. I mean, of course, the common ones are billboards, sides of buses. Then you have your obviously the social media platforms on games, and then you have all sorts of weird ad campaigns where they appear in random places. They put it on animals. You have certain kind of branding appearing everywhere, and I don't know, as you guys know, I like watching golf, and that's something, like when I watch a golfer I really like, and he's wearing, say, Nike, or he's wearing Titleist, and he's playing with a certain club. Now, that is interesting to me as a person who plays golf, but I don't get it when, these cricket players or whoever have like 40 brands on their clothes. You have everything from Micromax to Bharat Petroleum to I get it. You guys are walking banners and you guys are walking billboards, but do you feel there's a responsibility when you're endorsing a thing? Because I feel there is a little bit, right? Like when you see someone like Shah Rukh Khan putting his name and his mouth to everything. One is, how believable is he as a brand ambassador, or does it even fucking matter? Because just him lending his name to it, getting shitloads of money, he's done his work. But he's from everything from Byju's to Hyundai to thing. But will he ever drive a Hyundai personally? Will he ever put his kids in Byju's programs? I don't know. So that's something which I've been thinking about when it comes to ads, lending my name to an ad. Because, 7-8 years back, maybe longer, I did do an ad for Myntra. And it was because the money was good and a friend was shooting the ad, and I had to play this character like the equivalent of the Mac PC kind of campaign. I had to play the PC because Myntra was moving from PC to app. And my friend Sanjay Manaktala, who's at that point, we were doing comedy together, he was playing the app and I was playing the PC, the web browser. And yeah, very original. But it was fun. It was just a bunch of friends fooling around, and it, paid a little bit. But I don't know now what my stance on that is, because there are so many opportunities, especially if you're popular on the platforms. And today you're doing food, tomorrow you're doing fast food, tomorrow you're doing gourmet. And as you guys listening, or you guys viewing or consuming these ads, how much of it is entertainment, but how much of it is something that you believe and you say, you know what, I align with that. I think that because that guy's face and name and his belief doesn't even go that far. I don't get it. Because, I really don't understand what game is being played and how much it matters to believe in it, how much it matters to be quote unquote authentic about the messaging. But so far I've held off. And like for instance, even though many of you might not play golf, but if say Titleist comes to sponsor this podcast, I might think twice, because I'm like, you know what, this is not a golf podcast. Many of you don't play golf. What's the fucking point just because you guys are paying me? But if they say, you know what, we want to sponsor, I mean, this is just a far-fetched idea. If we want to sort of sponsor you as a visually impaired golfer, now something like that would be interesting, because I'm like, you know what, it'll help get traction for blind golf in India and get other people who are visually impaired, parents of kids who are not parents of visually impaired, parents of kids who are visually impaired, get them interested, get this on the map, and also get more resources pooled in so we can get this ball rolling, or get the initiative more attention and get people interested in the game, and also put some young golfers on the map. So that is something which I feel is interesting, right? Because if you are aligned with that, you're a sports person who endorses a sports brand, it's fine. But yeah, these guys, these cricketers, like, you have Dhoni and you have all these other guys in every aspect of advertising. I don't know how, one aspect, fuck it, they're paying you, do it. I get it. Very, very cool. Very, very important. You make your money and you fuck off, because you have a short shelf life as a sports person. But I think, not at the risk of sounding arrogant, actually, no, I'm going to sound arrogant when I say this, but I want cool brands, dude. I mean, I don't know what I mean by cool. I don't even mean like the Omegas and the Rolexes and whatever those fancy watches, and getting like Ferragamo shoes. There are so many cool people. Like, I bought this watch and I found out about it through a friend. It's called the Bradley timepiece. And it was made by a guy for his visually impaired blind friend, and the watch is entirely tactile. Now, it's not marketed as a high-end luxury good, but it's really cool. And just like that, there are people making cool things out of cool materials. There are cool t-shirt companies that are cool. So it's not just about, luxury. It's not just about status, but I think there needs to be an element of coolness, which of course this podcast represents. Now, I'm not tooting my own horn, am I? Because I was thinking, they use weird things nowadays, right? I think, like I was just reading this morning that the Russians have kind of trained a whale to go and spy on the Scandinavian coast, like on these countries. Like, they found this beluga whale going around with a harness, and it was just chilling. And apparently the reason why it made it in the news is because today or yesterday it just sped away from its regular pattern, and they are speculating that it's lonely, it's looking for its mates, it's maybe hormonally going through some changes, looking for its flock or whatever it's called. Is it a shoal for whales, or is it just a group of whales, or is it is it a bunch of whales, or is it who knows? And yeah, I just thought, like, fuck, what are we using? On one side you have drones and high-tech and AI-assisted kind of warfare, and next thing you're going back to training a whale like Free Willy. Hey, come here, that guy over there, Mr. Anderson, I want you to go check whether he's banging someone else. And that's complete ends of the spectrum, right? Just like my ad dilemma. You have things like really shitty brands which kind of fall apart, and the next thing you have really sort of old, standing the test of time kind of products. And so I'm facing the dilemma like the whale. I don't know, do I continue with my job spying? I'm not a spy, but continue with my job. There's absolutely no relationship with this analogy, right? I'm just talking out of my ass. But, like, see, for instance, a tattoo parlor. I would probably endorse a tattoo parlor who does good tattoos. Or I would give a shout out, fuck them paying me. And I feel, to some extent, I think there needs to be recognition for good work and quality work, and people who spend time and don't just jump on the bandwagon and be, oh, cool, everyone's doing tattoos, I'm going to tattoo. Everyone's getting on, on this biohacking, on life hacking, whatever it is, I'm going to do it as well. There are people who've gone for years without a social media account who are still doing great work, who go through word of mouth, and I respect those people, and I think they've done their work. They've gotten into a place where they're really good at what they do, and I think they need recognition. Whether it's an author, whether it's a comedian, whether it's a show, whether it's an artist, whether it's a tattoo artist, whether it's a musician. I know it's very rare that you never find them online now because everyone's got a footprint. But there are some people, interestingly, like I discovered at the Fringe when I went in 2017, there were some people you've never heard of, but they've been doing it for 20 years, and maybe they just didn't want to get into the game of promoting themselves, being picked up by a manager, getting famous, but they just love telling jokes. Yeah, they live like bums, like 7 people to a room, and they smell, but their jokes are fucking hilarious. So, just like that, it's a balance, right? How much do you want to sell yourself to the machine, and how much do you want to stay away from that? How much do you want to stick to what you like doing because you just enjoy it? And how much do you kind of want to compromise that for the mass appeal, for the big game, for getting the world tours, getting the big deals with the record labels or with the platforms? So all this is going on in my mind, and I'm sitting at home in my track pants going, yeah, big ideas, big thoughts, big problems, but I can keep it simple. And I love sharing all these ideas with you, and I hope I don't bore you with them, but this is what I do, and this is what I love doing this podcast for: sharing my ideas, sharing my problems, sharing my confusion, sharing my frustration, sharing my vision, and sharing my thoughts for the future. But before I go on and bore you further, I'm going to stop, because I've got a fantastic guest on today's episode, Dr. Laurie Betito. She's a clinical psychologist who's focused on sexual wellness but that's been her area of study for the past 30 years. She's helped couples, she's helped relationships, she's helped people above the age of 50, she's helped youngsters, she's a director on the PornHub Wellness initiative. She does her own podcast, she's been on television programs, and on today's episode, I wanted to ask her a few things surrounding the idea of sex, the conversation that we would like to have, but we all kind of giggle and run away from, right? And I'm not talking about basic sex education. That's, of course, important. But things that we got to understand, that each of us have our sexual preferences, and none of it should be demonized. There's this idea of shaming someone. Oh, you have a fetish, you freak, or like you watch porn, you're an addict, and it's anyone, right? Within couples, like if your partner finds out that you have, who knows, like an anal preference, and you're like, yuck, you're gross, you're disgusting. That kind of sticks with you and makes you feel abnormal. It makes you feel like something's wrong with you to have these thoughts, these fantasies, these preferences. And none of it is good or none of it is bad. None of it is should be demonized, because everyone is unique. Just like how, you might like a certain brand, I might like a certain brand, I like certain foods, you might like a certain food, you drink, I don't drink, or I drink, you drink. Just like that, sex is so diverse, sex is so personal, and sex is something that everyone should enjoy. And not just sort of be put under a uniform umbrella saying this is acceptable norms when it comes to sex. These are things that are preferences that we all can look at and say this is fine, this is not fine. Some people like swinging, some couples like open relationships. But all of it is a personal choice, and it's something that shouldn't be shamed and shunned. And Dr. Laurie explains through her vast knowledge, through her vast years of experience, what she has discovered and what can possibly even help you and me and make decisions and understand about yourself. So it's a lovely conversation. It's an important conversation in a day like today, where a lot of people are feeling isolated for the way they feel and for the things they like and the things they enjoy, and they don't share it because they don't want to be ostracized by their partners or by their friends or by their community or by their families. So I hope you enjoy it, because I had a lovely time talking to Dr. Laurie Betito. And Dr. Laurie, if you're listening, thank you for joining me. And to all of you listening, I appreciate it as always for you tuning in every week. Till next time, goodbye, God bless, take care of yourselves. Cheers. Dr. Laurie Betito, welcome to the SoapyRao show. It's a pleasure having you here today.
It's a pleasure being with you.
It's such a lovely conversation that I'm looking forward to, because you're someone from public radio, you're from someone in the broadcasting space now who's in podcasting, talking about something so essential in a day and in a time of the internet and information and dissemination of information, especially in the space which you've focused on in the past 30 years, which is sexual health and sexuality and topics around that. And we were just talking before we started recording about ChatGPT and AI and how these things are featuring in our lives nowadays. So maybe just to start with, from when you got into the field of sexual health and sexuality and sexual practices, etc. I don't know the exact terminology. Mm-hmm. So from then to today, just like how life and society has changed with the information age and the digital age, how has the conversation around sex and sexuality changed in your years of working with it?
Right. That's a good question, because I have been around since before the internet, right? So I started working before a lot of accessibility, where information was just not easily accessible. So what I noticed is that one of the biggest changes is that when I first started as a clinical psychologist and a therapist and sex therapy and all of that, is the kinds of problems that would end up in my office. And oftentimes I would see things where people would come in because they weren't sure if what they were experiencing was normal, or they had a certain fetish or interest that they just never met anybody like themselves and they didn't know, and it was very confusing. Fast forward 30 years, I barely see any of those, because now they just have to ask the computer if they're normal, when it's like, oh, I have an interest in feet, like I love feet, and then they find a whole community of foot fetishists. So they no longer feel alone. They now feel like they're connected to a community. They no longer feel like this is not normal, so to speak. So it has changed because of access to communities of like-minded people, right? A lot of things that back then were seen as maybe disordered or we used to use the word perversions. We used to use, the language has changed too,
Abnormal,
but
yeah.
right. Well, we never used the word abnormal, but some things were on the fringes, let's say, have now become mainstream. So if we think of BDSM practices, if we think of different kinds of fetishes, it's gone mainstream. And I don't think it's just the pornography industry that has done that, but it's everything else out there. It's exposure of all of these things. It's looking at communities and apps and dating places for like-minded people. So people are finding their people. And it has changed very much the way we approach it, or the way we see disorder. So something else that has changed is that nothing is disordered. I mean, unless, of course, it's illegal and harms other people and is non-consensual, and there's, some basics around that. But if you're not distressed by it, why is it a disorder? So if I have a foot fetish and it doesn't affect my life in a very negative way, why is it a problem, right? I'm not distressed by it. I just learned to incorporate it in my sexuality. Then, so that word distress is really important. So now I see people who are distressed by whatever it is, rather than just simply, I have this, does this make me abnormal?
So the thing is, it's a very essential part of being human, right? Having sexual thoughts and expressing your sexual needs. And as you said, each person has preferences, each person has certain inhibitions. But now I live in India, and India has always been seen as a conservative society. At least the hypocrisy is quite crazy. Our biggest population, and people joke about that, right? I mean, someone's doing it, right?
Somebody's doing it. That's right. Hey, I get a lot of questions from India, though. I have had over the years many, many people reach out from India with a lot of questions, and oftentimes very basic sexual health information questions, because of maybe a lack of sex education,
and also lack of acknowledging that it's a natural the natural order of things, right? That people do have it, and it's seen that, you should do it, but don't talk about it. It's abnormal. It's kind of taboo. But at the same time, there is this sort of expansion when it comes to people moving away from the traditional family. They're moving away from home to work, and especially, like, say, people in their 20s and 30s, and combine that with online exposure, with being on kind of almost like a freedom which was not there. There is a lot of things which are new to Indian society, and I mean, maybe not new as in brand new, but it's possibly been there, sort of under, in the woodwork, but it's coming out now, like with a lot more movements for gender, for sexuality, but even other things, like people having, I don't know if that's the technical term, but people have extramarital affairs, people infidelity,
or open marriages,
marriages, groups.
The definition of marriages have changed. The definition of relationships have changed, and I think, yes, people are. It's not that these things didn't exist. It's that people are talking about it a whole lot more, and actually seeing that there's not just one way anymore. There's many ways to express your sexuality. And what's important in all of that is that whatever you do, it's done in a consensual manner with people that agree with that you have the same values as them, and that you make an agreement, which is very different than infidelity. Let's say, where it goes behind somebody's back, where you're doing something in secret. We're seeing much more a movement towards a conversation where I don't want to cheat. I want to have a conversation where we decide together that variety is okay, or that we both agree on this. I think we have a ways to go before we get to, fully open kind of society in that way, which I'm not advocating for, because it's just that for some people it works, and for other people it doesn't work, and that's okay. We have to be respectful of that.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely great that it's at least it's almost like breaking out of the mold. And India, like many other countries in South Asia or maybe Southeast Asia, there was a very dominant role that the male played, right? That the men could do what they wanted. They can have a conventional family, but do whatever they want on the side. But the woman had to
Right.
stick to the role of mother, wife, and be faithful, etc., which is now changing. A lot of women-led empowerment when it comes to "It's my body, my choice," or
Good.
"My life, my choice." But there's no but in a negative way. But so what is happening is when these conversations, these changes are being led by a lot of women who are saying, you know what, if I want to have an open marriage, if I want. So what does that do when the women in society are becoming more free, more empowered with the choices they make with their body, and the men feel repressed and they feel like they are left out of the conversation? Is there, I mean, both sides of the conversation, but what happens to a society when the roles, if you want to call it, or there's a shift in power when it comes to the conversation around sex being led by one group?
Well, I'm not sure it's led by one group, but what we're seeing is a move towards true equality.
Mm-hmm.
So if it's not, women are cheating at the same rate as men are cheating now.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, I'm not, obviously infidelity is not a great thing. It's not great for marriage. It's not great for relationships.
Yeah.
But what we're seeing is that empowerment that if you can do it, I can do it too. It's not you have as many women in the workforce as you do men. I mean, why has this changed? It's we got women out of the house.
Yeah.
Women have a different role. They're not just moms and housewives and catering to men. So yes, there's maybe a backlash of men saying, wait a second, like this doesn't work for me. Of course it doesn't work for you because life was, it's like you had it good before, but it wasn't fair either.
Yeah.
So we're going to see a shift. And I think that the women's movement has gone faster than the men could catch up to it. So this is where men are feeling left behind, but they just have to run faster. You have to catch up, because it's not happening. We're not slowing it down.
Correct. Because you kind of see this thing now where there's a resurgence where, there are these groups. I keep forgetting the name. Like in the UK, they have this group, which is where a lot of men who are boys are feeling disenfranchised.
Incels. You're talking about incels? Yeah. Oh, geez. Yes.
And, they have these groups, and Andrew Tate name keeps coming up in these conversations where it's misogyny. And I don't know if it's true. I don't know the guy. I don't really follow his stuff. But when boys are saying the reason I'm unhappy is because of women. And so are these knee-jerk reactions to kind of have this regressive or this call to kind of say, hey, let's slow it down? Or is it kind of this thing going, I can't handle it, so I need someone who'll support me? What is happening as a result of this? And what do these groups create?
Well, I think it's very, very dangerous. I do think it's highly misogynistic. I think these are men who think women should cater to them. And unfortunately, if we're just looking at in a heteronormative, we're speaking a heteronormative language here, but it's this notion that women provide the sex for the men, right? Yeah. Instead of women participating or taking what they want as well. And so if the women are the holders of sex, in essence, if they're in control of, because they're in control of their bodies, and if the men want the sex, they can't just take what they want. I think there's a frustration on these particular guys and anger that women hold some level of power that they don't have. Right. And I think it's a power dynamic. It's this anger that you as in all you women are depriving me of, but really, if you were a nice guy and you were a giving and kind and a respectful human being, why would this happen? You're just angry because you're an angry male who's not getting sex, getting from women, when you should be thinking about it differently. It's more about sharing connection with somebody and sharing intimacy with someone. It's not just a provision of a service. So, women don't want to be looked at that way. And when we talk about female sexual empowerment, it's about, I make choices for me that suit me, and my pleasure matters too, right? It's not like I have to give sex. I'm married, therefore I owe sex to my husband, or I owe sex to a partner. It's about sharing, and it's about changing the way we look at sexuality as one part of that connection and intimacy and what have you. Not that sex just for sex isn't something, some people just want to have the physical side of it, and that could work as long as two people are on the same page again.
Yeah.
So I think that we just, those conversations are changing, and more women are feeling more sexually empowered without the shame that comes with it. So a man can have many sexual partners and be considered, oh, go dude, great stuff. And a woman does the same, and we slut shame her. We're still in that, we're still yeah. So we still have to move away from that, saying, well, what's the difference? If I want to have multiple sex partners just like you, why am I bad? Why does society look at me differently than they look at you?
And that's the interesting thing, because for many years men controlled a lot of the outlets where you would have sexual content, right? Whether it was the magazines like Playboy or Hustler, or the websites, the porn sites controlled by male producers or male talent agents, or and then of course the extreme side of that being human sex trafficking, which is of course still a very, very horribly present issue. But now, as you said, there's a lot of recall of power, and women are saying, screw this. We're not going to take, we're not going to take orders from men. We're not going to pose and be exploited by these male-led companies. But as a result of social media, you have a lot of the power being decentralized, a lot of power being given to the individual. And as a result, then, so I read somewhere, I could be completely off, but during the lockdown, one of the quickest things that rose in popularity, which helped women make money, was something called OnlyFans. Yeah. So what does that say? Now, again, is it a thing that my body, my choice, or does it speak to a deeper social issue when someone's given a choice and has empowered themselves, they decide to go down the route of, I don't know what the right word, displaying their bodies for money, or making their bodies available for people who are willing to pay. So what does that say on a more social level? Because as a clinical psychologist, you obviously do understand this beyond just the social trends and the social things. So what can you speak about that, please?
I can speak to, listen, I've spoken to many sex workers, performers, OnlyFans, people who've had sites on there. And the women I've spoken to have done it out of the joy of doing it. Like, it's something that, some people do the work out of a necessity for money and what have you. And for sure, what happened to the sex industry during lockdowns is it suffered quite a bit. So this was a way to make money for people who could not either perform or do sex work in real time, in real life. So this happened. But then, I've also met plenty of other people who feel empowered doing it, who are proud of their bodies, who feel safe doing it, who, yes, probably, obviously has some exhibitionistic traits, that, which is fine. Again, their choice, their control. So this is something that they have chosen to do because they want to do it. If you look at the porn industry, so much more is being produced by women producers, right? Yeah. So much of it. Why? There's a need. They recognize the needs of women. For it, the porn industry used to be dominated by male viewers. It isn't anymore, right? So now we have at least 40% of all viewers are female. So we're evening the playing field in that way, but women also understand. I mean, who are they catering to when they're doing their OnlyFans pages and showing themselves naked? They know they're catering to men generally. So they're also using what works for them to, I suppose, make money. I mean, I don't know what it says about our society, except that this has been around forever in one form or another. So
You know what it is?
I don't,
Yeah, and I mean, I'm sorry for interrupting, because I totally get what you're saying, because it is, end of the day, hey, this is my product. I'm going to sell it, right? But what I'm just asking generally is that, these things move with time, right? Like, because, you have sometimes, say, a social media influencer who's like got 100,000 fans, and they put on their bio or their description that, who loves life, traveler and philosopher, loves spirituality, and top 10 picks up with cleavage, right? So I have no issue with it. But my point is, it's hilarious, right? You read this quote by Nietzsche or someone, and suddenly you have them in a bikini,
right.
and
then you just see boobs. Yeah.
So
right.
what does that say about, because one side you're trying to, you kind of say profound expression of human, existential being, and the next thing you're like the most basic human need, which is, so both being juxtaposed. But it's also like, the person who's pretty today in our society, where, you say someone who's growing old is not pretty, and you have this particular shelf life, for lack of a better word. So what does that do? Because this is, at the end of the day, massaging your ego, right? Getting men commenting, saying you're so hot or you're so pretty. You're getting people to pay money for your 30-minute show. And
right.
So psychologically, you're getting that dopamine hit, right? Just like how you get likes, so you get that kind of your ego boost. So when that goes, and you've relied on this, say, for maybe 6 months or maybe 5 years, I don't know what the shelf life is for an OnlyFans influencer or whatever they're called, but because this has a larger, it occurs in different trends, right? For a person who's a YouTube star or a person who's a gaming star, the next big one will come along. And as a result, just like supermodels, once displaced by the other, which was, of course, in, say, earlier days, but whether it's run by men, whether it's run by women, there is a more long-lasting effect psychologically on the person. And what do you see any of that already manifesting in issues today?
Well, I think it's, if we focus just on our appearance, if we focus on just that part. I mean, why can't we be both smart and sexy, first of all? Right? Like, why can't the two coexist? But if you're just focusing on what somebody says you look like and not your mind, over time, you're going to lose your looks. Like, we all get old. If we're blessed, we get old, right?
Yeah.
We don't die young. We're going to lose the lackluster of that level of attraction to others. That if you're only getting your self-confidence from the validation of others, it's going to be problematic. At some point, you're going to develop something. So, self-confidence comes from within, and love of self. It's all from within, rather than just getting it from the outside. Hopefully, there's a maturity that happens over time, where, yes, attention is great. And listen, a lot of people love attention.
Yeah.
Clearly, I'm in the public eye all the time. I must love attention too. I don't mind it. It's okay. I get to disseminate information. I get people to listen, and it's all fine. But I'm aware of the fact that I'm not a 25-year-old sex therapist anymore. I'm a 60-year-old one now. I have a different, maybe I'm taken maybe more seriously as I get older. People are maybe listening to my words more than looking at my face. I don't know. I was never, that was never the thing. Right. But yet again, we have to learn and move away from just that physical stuff. And there's a lot to blame with that. When you think of Tinder and you think of swiping right and swiping, what are you swiping on? Only faces, right? You're just looking at how the way somebody looks. So again, it's all validation. It's all, we're in a society of likes and swipes, and it is harmful. I think psychologically it's harmful because it's a lot of pressure. It's a lot of pressure, and people get depressed. Oh, I only got 3 likes on this post. Now I'm depressed. So you're basing your mental wellness on what the outside is doing rather than working from the inside out. So
yeah, it's like living your entire life to get the right profile picture for Tinder,
exactly,
or to get that right shot on the beach with the sunset. And then
right.
also you break your head for the right caption, and you do all that because your entire existence or your self-worth is based on that post. And next thing, 3 people like it. And out of that, 2 comments are like, oh, you put on weight. That's it.
Right. Well, the thing is, if I think we're all guilty of capturing the right picture that we want to post. And most of us who have social media are conscious of this and pay attention to this. It's when you tie in all of your self-worth into that's problematic. And I see this mostly with teenagers, right? The pressure's really on them. Teenagers feel it way more. As you get older, you mature and you realize, social media, I don't want to do this anymore. Too much pressure. I'm putting this aside. I'm noticing a lot of younger people turning off their social media every once in a while, going on a social media diet where they just end it and then go back on it after a while. So I am seeing that happening because people are recognizing this is not good for my mental health. Yeah. Ultimately.
And that's the strange thing, right? I mean, I've been off Facebook now for almost 2 years, maybe a little more.
That's it?
Yeah, I know. I'm new to this.
My God. I think I've been there 20 years, 15 years.
No, I've been off Facebook for 2 years.
Oh, off Facebook. I thought you went on it.
No.
Good.
Yeah.
You. Okay.
I mean, I had the account. It kind of happened, unintentionally, because my account got hacked. Because I was offered something by some Russian guys like, I'd love to advertise on your website. And I'm like, oh, cool, I get free money. And next thing, they hacked my thing. I was greedy.
Oh, no.
Anyway, but it was a good way to me get out of Facebook. And anyway, it's been, I think, 21 or 2020, I think. Anyway, the page is active. It's just that, someone else posts for me. But, and that's the thing I wanted to talk to you about, not Facebook accounts getting hacked. But the interesting thing I feel when I look at this entire, you can say almost the entire shift where content is so, and I'm not talking about the hardcore internet, of course, that is got a lot of plus and minuses, but things like Tinder, Snapchat, where it's all about just your image and expressing yourself through that particular image. Like, there is a constant need to be on there, the constant need to post. And it's almost like, it's not a photo a day. It's like 30 photos. Every photo is of one particular, like lunch, breakfast, between lunch and breakfast, between changing clothes. And so, okay, this I may be digressing a little bit, but when that's the only world and when the coming back to your family or sitting in your room without that seems like very sort of disconnected. And a lot of the content is propagating promiscuity and saying it's okay, and people having sex at much, much more younger ages. And here's the next thing which I want to talk about.
That's actually not true. People are not having sex at younger ages. In fact,
good. Okay. I mean, good that you told me that. Okay.
Yeah, research shows that people are having sex much later now, not earlier, and they're having less sex. So the youngest generation right now are having much less sex than a previous generation. And part of it is because exactly what you just said. They're online all the time. Young people do not leave their bedrooms. Young people do not socialize. Young people are drinking less because they're not socializing as much. And when you take away alcohol, you also reduce sex, because in youth, alcohol consumption and sexuality is connected. So we're actually seeing a trend. It's a good thing, and it's a good thing on the one hand. On the other hand, what I'm noticing is young people who are not developing social skills, the skills required for that.
Okay, so a couple of points which I want to talk about is, one is there's this huge concern of children, and I could be wrong again, like my previous observation. If I'm wrong, please correct me, that children are being exposed to content which is very sort of sexual and graphic in nature. Like when I say children, I don't mean teenagers, I mean 8-year-olds, 9-year-olds. And apparently that's developmentally extremely bad for them. because it completely affects their way of looking at relationships or men and women and the body and whatnot, right? Could you comment on that? And also, what? Okay, let's just talk about that, because my next point, I think, or the next question I have is more. Anyway, I'll come to that.
So, of course, it's problematic when you have kids exposed, especially early on, to pornography accidentally. Oftentimes they're not even, it's just accidentally on their computers or whatever, because you have kids who are online. But it's not just that, it's everywhere. So you have more pornography on Facebook than you would have anywhere else, or on Instagram, or on Snapchat, or on TikTok, or it's rampant everywhere. We're not going to eliminate that. But what you can do is counter it with education. So as parents, we have to limit, obviously, as much as possible, be aware what our children are watching, put in controls where necessary, and talk to them about what they're seeing. Get children to become critical thinkers of what they're watching or what they're exposed to, and talk to them about healthy sexuality, health. Like, you have to have these conversations, and parents are afraid of talking openly about sexuality, thinking that if I talk about it, somehow it's going to make them do it. That's not what happens. It's like, information is power here, and knowing and trying to tell children that this is adult behavior, this is not appropriate for their eyes. And then as they get older and can become more critical of what they're watching, you have conversations about pornography. You make them porn literate. In other words, like, what do you see here? What's missing here? Is this consent? Is that like, you have to have conversations about this so that they understand, because we're not going to eliminate it from society. It is everywhere. Sex has always been the thing that sells from the dawn of time. And so we have to make people more aware and counter it with sex education. And if you eliminate sex education, then you let them learn from one source, and that's not the best source, because you don't learn healthy sex through pornography.
And why is that? Because, as you said, there are so many more women producers. There's so much more content and opportunity to find the right content. But okay, why in itself?
But it's entertainment. Pornography is entertainment. It's not education.
Right. Now, I'm not saying from the educating point of view, but why is pornography demonized? And why, people who say, I'm addicted to masturbation, or people saying, I went off porn. I get it. I get the thing, but where did this entire thing of pornography as leave it as an education source. Yeah, I know, because
the devil.
Yeah. Why is it more and more being demonized and saying it's horrible, it's bad for your mental health, etc., etc.?
This is a good conversation to have, because if you look at the millions upon millions upon millions of people who watch porn, all you have to do is look at the numbers from one site, just from PornHub, for example, when they release their data every year. And you see how many millions per day around the world are watching. Those are not all people who have problems with porn. Yeah. You have a small percentage who use porn as their drug of choice, like any other drug, who use it to escape life, who use it as a way to disconnect from stuff, because like you mentioned earlier, that dopamine rush and, a good orgasm brings feel good things and allows you to escape from whatever stresses you have or boredom or what have you. So you have a small portion of the population. I mean, comparatively in numbers may be big, but in percentages small in terms of porn viewers, who develop issues with porn, like who do it, who watch compulsively, who masturbate compulsively. But porn is not the causer of that. Something else is, they just use that, and it's readily available as their drug of choice. It is not the cause. If that was the cause, there would be far more people who are screwed up and who are addicted or whatever than what we're seeing. most people use porn in a, I don't know, responsible way. I don't even know how to say it, but
recreational way.
Recreational way. It's like, oh, I'm horny. Let me just look at some images that trigger my arousal. 5 minutes later, they're done. They're not
and
watching
wouldn't you say
3-hour
more,
movies.
That isn't that better than, this kind of things you hear, horror stories of, from teenagers to maybe young adults going and harassing women, and on university campuses and school campuses, and physically harming women, and this aggression, sexual aggression. So wouldn't porn serve a better purpose?
Choose one, well, if it serves that purpose, yes, except that sexual assault is not about sex, it's about power. Right. And it's very, what drives somebody to rape, it's not lack of it's not sexual outlet, sexual material or whatever. It's not a sexual outlet. It's about power, and it's far more
dangerous.
Far more dangerous than that. But if it does help in terms of having an outlet, instead of harassing somebody, who would be stupid enough not to choose that? It's like, why would we eliminate that if it helps that? But I just haven't seen any. I'd have to look at the research. The research does not show that people who watch porn are more likely to rape. That's for sure. You do see the opposite happening. So people need to do their research. But the problem is, in our society, and a lot of it in Western society, I'm not sure where you are, but you have a huge, you have a very loud right-wing, extreme right, religious right, that vilify anything to do with sexuality, and especially pornography. And they're very loud voices. So they will cherry pick whatever information to present to say that, to prove, so to speak, that it's big and evil and must be eliminated and what have you. But pornography in one form or another has been around as long as man has been around. That's the reality. Yeah,
I mean, because I'm sure you've heard of this, when in reference to India, people are like, oh, we are the land of the Kama Sutra.
We are the first, yes.
But that may be the truth, but I'm not, I haven't read it. I'm not an expert in that particular text. But even if you'd say 1,000 years back, because there's so many sort of things that have happened in the Indian landscape, culturally, socially, economically. But definitely, if you look at temples, you look at their architecture, you look at depictions of men and women, and there has been a lot more sexual expression in that time than today, because there is a lot more repression. So to what you said about porn not being the cause of all these issues, or even the men who go and rape, it's not about the sexual expression, it's about the power. These are clearly issues of repression, clearly views of, clearly signs of how a man views other men, other women. So why? Okay, so maybe the question, which I should probably rephrase to, is what role has or does sex play in a society, and does it necessarily have to be bad, or can it be a cohesive force for progress?
Why is it bad, though? Let's look at why is it bad? If you look at sexuality in its what is the purpose of sexuality? For most of us, it's to connect to other people. Mm-hmm. So we think of sexuality in our times often as just this thing, getting off and having that orgasm and whatever. But if you look at people in general, most of us use sexuality to connect to somebody we care about, mm-hmm. to be intimate with, to feel just to feel that connection. It's like our souls meeting. It's more than just our bodies joining, and it has a deeper meaning for many of us. That's the case. I'm not saying that sex as sport doesn't exist, because for many it does. Even those that have loving relationships with one person may use sexuality within that relationship as a sport as well, right? So I'm thinking of people who are swingers, for example. Mm-hmm. I've met plenty of people who practice polyamory or open relationships or swinging who are in loving, wonderful primary relationships, but decide together that let's go play, and they just play with other bodies. And and it works for them. And like, who are we to judge what they do?
Absolutely,
they're doing it with consenting adults, and they're not doing anything illegal.
Yeah.
So there are people who see it that way. So it all depends on how do you approach sexuality? What is the meaning of sexuality for you? So it's not like one definition or one meaning. What about sexual? Like, when people say the word sex, they think of penis inside vagina, but that's one aspect of sex. So I prefer to talk about sexuality in general, because everything we do that feels connected to somebody else in terms of touch and is part of sexuality. You don't need a penis inside a vagina to create sex. So it's sexual energy.
Yeah.
There's a lot of shame around sexuality, a lot of shame around sexuality, a lot of guilt. But historically, that comes from religion. Like, that just comes from upbringing and very strict religious upbringing, where sex is seen as sinful. Sex is seen as it's only for procreation. We forget that people have sex because it feels good.
Yeah, and also there's this condemnation even within circles, right? Like, if you like something or you enjoy watching something, because it gives you a sense of, I don't know what it could be, that there's something wrong with you, or there's like, what's weirdo, or you kind of are scared to address it. Like, even if you're in an intimate relationship with someone, you're scared to ask them whether you want to try this, because the conditioning is like, you know what, if you don't enjoy it in this particular way, then there's absolutely something, you're depraved,
Yes, exactly. It's that fear of, if I voice my interest, I'm going to be judged as perverted, depraved, whatever word you want to use.
Yeah.
Yes, that's exactly it. So there's a lot of shame attached to even talking about sexuality. So my purpose in the last 30 years, and I guess my life's purpose, has been to bring out those conversations, talk about topics that nobody wants to openly talk about, but that people are asking questions about. So, when I started in radio 30 years ago or so in Montreal, this was not a topic we openly talked about on the airwaves, but I was fortunate enough to be given the microphone to talk about it, never knowing how long was this show going to last, because somebody's going to try to shut it down. We were fortunate because it wasn't taken away. It was celebrated. It was, people wanted the information that we could tell just by the listenership, right? So people, even though there were some people that were like, oh my God, this is disgusting. How can you talk about sexuality? Like, I have kids in the car. I mean, it was always a late night show anyway, for that reason. But what I noticed was I never shied away from the really tough topics, like even talking about anal sex and bisexual, like whatever it was any topic, even though people didn't practice what I was talking about, or most people, they wanted to hear about it. And it was a conversation starter, right? I heard this talk, or I heard this. And so people start to talk a little bit more about it. And to me, that's vital. We have to start somewhere. And it starts with conversation, like what we're having now,
And that's such a sad thing, that we can't express or feel safe expressing our most fundamental human need, which of course, you could kind of minimize into lust or whatever the religious texts would call it. But beyond that, there's this thing that, I am this person, I, find pleasure in it, but I also would like to share it with another human being. But I'm terrified of doing that, because by just expressing that, I might lose my entire connection and be sort of portrayed as this person who's got sick preferences. And if that way is repeated, I'm saying across generations, then you just have this group of people who will say, I did my duty, I have children, so I procreated, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, what's happening in the bedroom. Right. And then next thing you know, they're sitting in wherever, adult men or adult women are sitting, and completely repressed. And next thing you have this jokes going, I would do shows for corporates, right? Or I would do shows for more formal get-togethers, whether it was at the golf club or whether it was at a, gala event with senior management, whatever. And they would say, no jokes below the belt. And I'm like, you're all 50 plus. Like, what is below the belt, right? Like, you all
Right.
have
They
had
won't even
sex.
say the word. They won't even say the word sex or
Oh,
penis
no,
or
no, no,
vagina,
no, no.
right?
Not at all. They're like,
Right.
you mustn't. And they have these family days. And of course, I understand the family days because the parents are more shy or scared to talk or hear, a sex joke where the kids are like, you know what, I get it.
That's
But
right. Kids are getting it. Yeah.
so the thing is, it's the hypocrisy because these people will literally turn around, come for my public show where they bought tickets and be falling off the chair and they want to hear jokes about and sex jokes or jokes about sex, right? Dick jokes, whatever it may be. They're loving it. But the same CEO who's come as the person for my show loves it. But when he's wearing the role of, oh, I'm chairing the panel on this, is like, I would never
Right.
condone such material, So
Sure. But they're those same guys that are going to whatever.
they probably just
Strip
had sex with the
clubs
secretary and came for the event,
yeah. I'm telling you, it's a very yes.
So what does that create in a society? What are we saying by this behavior? What is it? Is it just hypocrisy? Is it just this
Yes.
attitude of holier than thou? What I
Yes.
do. Yeah. So can you talk about that?
Yes, yes, and yes. Like that's that's it is the hypocrisy. And I can tell you how many times I have where somebody has come into my office who is very religious, but they have a sex addiction. And they're very religious, but they visit prostitutes. They are very so the like how they live with that hypocrisy internally, right? It's like, so I go to the hooker in the afternoon and I go pray at night, right? And it's like, how do you make sense of those two things in your head, right? It's like you say one thing to the world and do another thing in private. So if you look at statistically, for example, in the US, in states where they are where they don't do sex education, where they have like abstinence only education, more religious based, you have more people accessing porn, more sexually transmitted infections, more unplanned pregnancies. So, you're trying to ban porn on the one hand, but in those places that you're trying to ban something, you have more of it. So think about that, right? Like you're saying that the taboo nature of something makes you want it more and makes you access it more. So if we had more open conversations, I don't know. I just think it would just, if it was less taboo, and it's not about doing it, it's about expressing it. It's about talking about it. It's about saying, hey, you're sexual. I have my preference. You have yours. All good. I'm not judging you. Don't judge me. As long as we're doing it legally, safely, and consensually, I'm not going to judge you and you don't judge me. Like, to each his own. Like, live and let live. Why are we judging other people who are not hurting other people?
Yeah.
Right? Like, what is it to me if you're gay or you're into feet? Like, what do I care? Like, this is how you express your sexuality. I may not like it and it may not be for me, but why do I condemn you for your preferences?
There's a sense of patronizing someone, right? Like, oh, this person, like I just, have normal sexual preferences. And there's this thing, right? When someone, like when Tiger Woods had all those affairs, everyone's like, how? But he's such a good golfer. I'm like, man, when he's in that level, being exposed to so much attention, and I don't know if women are throwing themselves at him, but there's so many opportunities. They are, and maybe, there's so many opportunities. Late night, there's some drinks, and everyone's like, my God, you're the best, you're Tiger. I mean, I would, but because I couldn't, or because people are like, oh, how dare, he's a married man. I'm like, oh, come on. You're never going to be in that situation.
Yeah, but it's a choice, right? It's like monogamy is a choice. If he had chosen to stay faithful to his wife and not be maybe an entitled whatever, like, I don't know him. I don't want to, judge him in that way. What I didn't like was that when somebody is doing this, consistently unfaithful and what have you, and then they say, oh, but I have a problem. I'm a sex addict. No, you just are entitled and took advantage of your notoriety and had sex because the opportunity was there. Why does that make you a sex addict? Why are you using that as I'm ill because of this? Like, I think people have used that, and it is a problem. And when
if you own up to
celebrities
saying,
use that, own it. Just like, there's a lot of entitled people who think they deserve it. So
why not? But if you deserve it, and you fall prey to that weakness or that temptation, own it, right? Because that would be, it came with the territory. I enjoyed it, and you know what? I will deal with the consequences, as opposed to I have a problem, I have a weakness. I know, but it also says a lot about the people who comment on that, who look at the tabloids, going, "Oh my God, I thought he was a good man who played good golf." I'm like, golf has nothing to do with it.
Golf has nothing to do with it. Is he a good man? I don't know if he's a good man. Good men can do bad things, but I also know about men who are who have a lot of self-importance, who are narcissistic, who are entitled, who think that they're better than everybody else, and who go ahead and behave this way because they can, and because they feel they deserve it. So those
some of the
are
most sexually prolific
kind of
men
breed.
Who are sleeping with multiple women, married women in India right now, are these so-called godmen, these so-called spiritual leaders. You heard of them in the news, right? Every time they build up in fame, they build up with all their spiritual, or if you don't use spiritual or religious, whatever the word is, they call them, they preach all these things from all these texts. They're like, yeah, we'll show you the light. And next thing you know, there's some camera footage, or they have so many cases of harassment, women stepping forward. All these people who so-called, these cult heads, these cult leaders.
Yes.
It's ridiculous. I mean, and as you said, it doesn't talk about sex. It talks about the power game there.
It's all power. And we know this already. The more power you have, the more likely you are to cheat. There's there are facts on that one. So for sure, power breeds this kind of thinking.
But then there's some of these people who have sex and they're open about it, and they said, I don't get married because I don't think I can stay faithful. But then they demonize. As you said, this.
No, I respect those.
Yeah,
I respect
because they're some of the kindest people
who can say that. Exactly. A person who can stand up and say, I cannot be monogamous. I do not choose monogamy. I do not want to be monogamous. I do not want to be with just one partner. Okay, you've said it. You let your partners know. Your partners are aware. So the expectations are very clear. That is your choice. And why should I judge your choices? I'm okay with that. Just because I want to be monogamous or I choose monogamy for myself, that doesn't mean you have to choose the same, or that my way is the best way. Why is my way the best way?
How do people broach these conversations? Because you obviously field a lot of these questions and topics on your podcast, which is called the Passion Podcast. If people are listening, they should definitely check it out, because Laurie goes into a lot more detail episode by episode. So I'll link it in the description when you guys obviously you would have checked it out by now.
Thank you.
Yeah. So what is the best way for someone to even broach? Because the fear of rejection, the fear of being told, you know what, we need to go see a therapist, or you know what, we need to see your lawyer because you have some illness when you're expressing these needs which I can't fulfill. So how does even someone broach this topic with their partner or partners?
Yeah, well, it is. Listen, it's not an easy answer, but thankfully more and more people are reaching out for help. So I do notice that thankfully, because of the internet and accessibility and you have people who can ask questions. There are people you can go to get some answers. So that it often begins like that, with somebody sending a question, and I have this situation, and how do I do this, and be able to assess, okay, does this couple need help? Do they need help communicating? I mean, I help couples oftentimes communicate in general, but oftentimes about sexuality, because it's the hardest thing to talk about. But you need to figure out what are the beliefs. What is your partner belief? Like, you don't just come in and say to a partner you've been with for 10 years, by the way, I have this fetish where I like to wear a diaper and I'd like to poop in my diaper and I want you to clean it up. Like, you don't just spring that on somebody. You gently bring up the topic of fetishes. Like, you have to start and say, okay, like here's where I'm at, or what do you think about this? And have you ever thought about that? And what do you think of people who do this? And like, if a person starts to like be like, oh my God, I would never, like, you have to be careful how you address it, but you may need to go get help to find out how to address it. And then you have to decide, how important is this thing for you? So if your fetish is very important to you, like, for example, I'll meet people who are really into power dynamics, right? Bondage, discipline, dominance. And for them, they need this in their life. They need this in their sex life. Well, if you know this about yourself, please don't pretend that you are vanilla when you're going out with somebody and then spring it on them, hoping that they will match up with you. Know it ahead of time. Talk about it ahead of time. Say, this is what I'm looking for. Then if a person agrees, great. If they don't and it's not for them, at least let them walk away. So
is it okay for someone to talk about it, then they both kind of arrive at their own conclusion? Say the person who likes the diaper and pooping in it and getting it clean, and the wife or the husband, whoever, it says, I can't do it, but you know what? I'm absolutely okay with you doing it somewhere else. Is that something you've come across where people say,
yes,
get it somewhere else?
Well, an example, the diaper and the pooping is a bit of an exaggeration, but
no, I read about it in a book recently. That's why I almost smiled.
Really? Okay.
One of the characters likes to dress up to wear a diaper and get whipped.
But there's a whole community of diaper people and adult babies and all of that. Yes, but if that's your thing and you want to practice that, you need to find a partner who's willing to do that with you, or a partner who says, I respect your thing. I don't want to be a part of your thing, but I'm okay if you go to the adult daycare to take care of whatever, like meet up with people, as long as you don't do XYZ, like with limits. So I've met people, for example, where the man wants to be a submissive and the wife is not interested in being a dominant and or gets turned off by that and says, you know what, hire a dominatrix. I'm okay with that. Like, as long as you don't have sex with her, but you practice whatever, I'm okay with that. So sometimes, yes, I can't say that that's the usual thing, but it's very hard to spring it on somebody once you're engaged in a relationship, right?
So I think acknowledging all these differences is such a healthy place. Like, even with jokes, right? If people are like, you know what, because right now I almost feel it's silly, right? Like, oh, it's a gay joke and everyone giggles, and it's very childish the way we talk about sex even in entertainment or in sitcoms, or as you said, like if a CEO is caught having sex, he's fired and he's shamed and publicly humiliated. The scandal. And if we can arrive at a place, as you said, where it's discussed in a mature way, if they can't do it, then they go to a place which is safe, or which is encouraging for these things, where there's a sense of acceptance. Don't you think we can move on as a society to better things?
It's going to be a while till we get there. Unfortunately, that is the...
You heard it first here, though.
Big taboo. It's going to be I don't know if it will happen in my lifetime, but we are moving towards more openness in some parts of the world, and in other parts of the world, we seem to be moving backwards. When you think of taking away women's right to choose, in the States, like, that's backwards. That's not that's not moving forward. So
that is, in fact,
some people holding back, holding back, wanting to hold us back, and going back to those, I guess what they would view as those conservative values. Yes, life might have been simpler way back then, but you have to take into account the evolution of society and technology and accessibility, and like, we can't just go back in time, And
I think that's one of the most medieval laws that not medieval, if that's but the most ridiculous thing that you can take away. You can say equality, women in the workplace, but when you take away, a woman it's her body. Like, it's like women making laws saying that, men, we can't come to anything close, but men cannot ejaculate without our permission. Like, what kind of laws are these, right? Like with the banning abortion. I'm not pro-choice, pro-life. I'm not going to bring that in.
I can't even go in. I can't even have that argument because there's so many holes in so many arguments. Like it's not about, like you said, it's not about being pro-abortion.
Yeah.
It's about being pro-choice for the woman, and it's her mental health too, and her
Yeah.
physical health. And there's so many
And who's making these laws? It's these old
factors.
men.
Always
Yeah.
men. Yeah.
I mean, see, I'm not a progressive liberal. I'm not, none of these things. I don't call myself conservative or any of these labels, but it just seems like, you know what? I have a daughter now who's only 11 months old, but man, you got to give them a life that they can find dignity in, right? Nothing else, because these things take away dignity. It takes away human dignity, which is the most backward thing you can do, and call yourself a leader of the free world, you know?
I know. Listen,
Not leader, but
I know it's
yeah.
very frustrating to see. And, but anyway.
Yeah. One thing I want to ask you, I think we're done here with time, but as someone who spent so much time understanding human behavior when it comes to sexual preferences, sexual acts, and talking to people, guiding people, helping people make sense of what they find and what their preference, what gets them on, what and without them feeling ashamed, less human about themselves. What is your stand on how prostitution and more importantly, legalizing prostitution, whether for men or for women, what role can that play in creating a sense of balance or upheaving the social fabric? So what can that do for society?
It's a big question. I mean, I think it has its place. I think it's always had its place. Look, I'm certainly all for decriminalizing sex work and what have you. Obviously, there are extremes, right? When you start talking about prostitution, people start talking about drug traffic, about human trafficking and sex trafficking, and obviously nobody could be for that and what have you. And that would, we need to eliminate that. And I think part of the problem is if you don't, the way that one you can look at it is if we don't eliminate prostitution, you're kind of feeding the sex trafficking industry. But I also think that if you take that away, you're creating a whole underground, because it's like people are still wanting and still needing and still going to go for it. They're just going to have to go elsewhere for it. So when something is more readily available and done safely, and where people are protected, where sex workers are protected, where people who seek out sex work, and where everything is done consensually, it can have its place. Like I don't it breaks my heart when I see a whole underground business that's profiting off the backs of these women who are doing it non-consensually. I haven't had much. Yeah. It's horrendous. It's beyond awful. I don't know much about it in terms of, like, I just have not been exposed or have not spoken to women who have been trafficked. So I don't want to speak on behalf of them, but I have spoken to many sex workers in my line of work, and they choose. This is what they choose. This is where they want to be. This is what they have chosen to do as work, and they want to be protected, and as they should be. They should not have to feel danger, that they're put in danger. They should not have to feel like, they should be protected and feel safe.
You mentioned that, and I haven't met sex workers or been to these, but like in Calcutta, there's one of the biggest red light districts called Shonagachi. It's a district, and one of the guests I had in the podcast, her name is Rijala Das. She's written a book, I think it's fiction, called A Death in Shonagachi. But she was talking about the sex workers there, and it's a very interesting space. I mean, not to make it interesting in the sense like interesting. Oh, we should go there for a school trip, but. It's
no, but as an adult trip, you can. Yeah.
No, but not even the sex aspect. Like, it's these women who are sex workers, but because it's such an old and this huge district, it's basically the women who don't just go there to have sex; they live there. So then they have to get their groceries, they have to cook. They also have side businesses. There's some person who imports like food from Southeast Asia. They raise their children in that environment. So I think you might love that book. I don't know what it's called on the Amazon store in the US, but I can send you the link. But
Yeah,
in Southeast Asia, it's called A Death in Shonagachi. But it was a very vivid description of that district, and I found it very, very revealing. So just thought I'll bring that to your attention.
Yeah, well, when you go and you visit places like Amsterdam and the red light district, where it's controlled, like it's it's clean, controlled, it has its rules, it has its
Yeah.
and nobody bats an eye. It's like,
Even
okay.
Thailand, it's not a
And
district.
Thailand, yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
It's very interesting because you go there, and if you go there with your family, you're like, the hypocrisy is like, look at these people, how dare they? But you go alone, and there's this wink, wink, nudge, nudge with Indian as well, in India, right?
Oh,
Like, you went to Bangkok. Oh, man, But
And I did, and I did travel to Thailand, and
great place.
I went to sex shows, and I did
Yeah.
go to visiting these areas, which is done very openly.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
And it's mainly run by women. I mean, the women are the ones you talk to, in the sense you don't have, it's not shady. It's not like, oh my God, I'm doing something. And I think, the fact that you can go for a meal with your family to a restaurant, and then you step out and there's this thing, it kind of makes you face the idea of shame, which I think is nice.
Yeah. Well, there's lots to talk about.
I think I'm going to definitely have you back on when
Sure.
you are free next. But before that, if you could tell people listening right now where they can find your book, and also how they can subscribe to your podcast, and maybe reach out to you if they have questions of their personal, I wouldn't say
Sure.
issues, but their personal experiences and how they're dealing with it.
Yeah,
Please, could you
issues
drop?
too, and we do feature on the podcast. The podcast
Mhm.
is Passion with Dr. Laurie,
Mhm.
and we do feature questions, so listener questions that we keep anonymous, obviously, but I do answer questions at the beginning of every podcast. So please, you can send them.
And is the podcast everywhere, or is it on just your website?
Everywhere. So it's absolutely everywhere. Yes, on all the podcast platforms. And
Lovely.
if people want to join me on Instagram, just look for Passion with Dr. Laurie and John. And yes, like us, follow us. You'll get information. I provide some other content and videos and things like that. So
I hope a lot of people who are listening right now, don't hesitate to come forward and ask you questions, because I think it's healthy, makes for more mature, more balanced conversation without all these kind of under the table kicking. They're like, and it makes my corporate shows more fun when you say, don't do jokes under the belt,
Exactly. And if people want to see, like, I've done a couple of TED Talks as well. So if you just Google my name and in the TED area, then you'll see a couple of my TED Talks on female sexuality and long-term relationships, et cetera, et cetera. And my book, The Sex Bible for People Over 50, is available on Amazon and on my website, which is drlaurie.com.
Brilliant. I'll link the website, I'll link the book, I'll link the podcast.
Thank you so much.
Dr. Laurie Betito, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for sharing your vast experience and knowledge and expertise with everyone listening and me today. Appreciate it. Thank you so much for joining me.
My pleasure so much. My pleasure.
Thank you.